the first thing that we're going to do, make sure I use the right button here. Yay. It always is great when technology works. So the issues related to professional learning communities really talk about making sure that it's a huge shift that people go through, because teaching is quite possibly the second most private act that adults engage in. And when you start breaking down classroom walls and classroom doors, it can be very, very uncomfortable for a lot of people that have spent a lot of years working in isolation. And the issues about fundamentally dealing with students when they don't learn the concepts is critical. What this grant is, the way that I understand the grant, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the grant is designed to help have a very deep, meaningful implementation of the California Common Core standards in mathematics. That's a tall order. And all of you know that by working in your groups and also by doing this professional development. It's not child's play. But the work of teachers has to become interdependent. You have to start learning from one another and use one another as your best resources in this. And that takes a little bit of time, because it takes time to build the trust. It takes time to break down the walls of fear that a lot of teachers have. But it's part of an ongoing school culture that helps people understand that the purpose of what we're doing is to ensure that students learn. The way that we can best encourage students learn is by using the collective wisdom at your school site or your grade level. So we're going to come back to these 3 bullets at the bottom. But the idea here that's really critical to not forget in all of this work is that the focus is on what the students are learning. For those of you that are familiar with the 4 questions, the 4 questions that the Do For model uses is, what is it we want students to learn? So that's the very first thing. The second question is, how will we know they learned it? The third question is, how will we respond when students don't learn? And the fourth question is, how will we extend or enrich activities for students that already know it? So those are the 4 key questions to this whole model. And it involves a real collaborative culture, a collaborative conversation, and that takes time to build. And the idea here is you're always looking at results. You're looking at the results that you see in terms of student work, in terms of teacher practice. Both of those results are critical to keep track of as you go through this process. So we've already talked about the questions. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to facilitate that dialogue, and we're going to focus on how to facilitate that dialogue when you have some resistance in the room, because I bet there's probably 1 or 2 of you that have a resistance story you'd like to share. But the last bullet is important too, that this is one of those things that builds knowledge as you go. Not everybody knows everything that they need to know to make this a successful implementation. But what you can build over time is better and better understanding at the grade level for the standards for mathematical practice as well as the content. And that's the key to this whole process. So, at your table groups, we did this hopes and fears thing last week. So take a look at these bullets. We'll give you about 5 or 6 minutes to talk at your table group about what this process looked like. Couple pieces of advice. If you have a high-functioning PLC at your group or at your school, I'm not sure I'd do this, okay? Number 2, if anybody's run this protocol in the last week, do you have any advice to give your peers? Raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone around to you. Yeah, okay, thank you for saving me, appreciate that.
Well, I would say one thing I did was I had a piece of paper that already had printed out hopes and fears, so they had something to write on rather than just whipping out a piece of paper on their own. And the other thing was I was prepared to share some fears of mine, and so I think once I did that, then people in the group were more apt to be honest and open up with what their fears were too.
Thanks very much, Robin. Anybody else have any helpful tips for anybody that might decide they want to use this back at your school site? So I understand we have a few principals in the room too. Anytime there's another big change coming up that is going to impact your entire school, this is a great protocol to use. I have used it, like I was telling you the other day, I've used it in a number of different venues, and it just seems to take a lot of the sting out of whatever the rest of the meeting is. So I would encourage you to consider using this. One of the things that I heard through the grapevine was that some people were not sure about how to take the hopes and fears and then turn them into a norm. So I have a couple of examples up here on the slide. But for those of you that were able to conduct this back at the school sites, can you describe what that changing, how you took a hope or a fear and changed it into a norm? Had anybody done that? If you're going to go from the hopes and fears to a norm, you want to focus on behaviors. What behavior do you expect to see in your PLC? Maybe it never happens to you folks, but it happens to me all the time. When I have a nonprofit board that I meet with once a month, and one of the we had to establish norms, and on our agenda, the norms are right at the top. And the first norm is that members of this board will not engage in sidebar conversations. And so what was happening was you go to a board meeting and two people over here would be talking about this issue, two people over here would be talking about this issue, and it just made for a babble. So what we said is that at board meetings, people will not engage in sidebar conversations. So if you walked into our board meetings, well, most of our board meetings, what would happen is you wouldn't see that going on. So that's the behavior. When you get to norms, you want to think about what the behavior is that you're trying to do. So did all of you bring your norms today from perfect? Okay, so take a look at your norms and go through these 4 bullets that are up here. And we'll give you about 5 or so minutes and we'll check and see if that's enough time. But what you're going to do is take a look at the behaviors. Talk about which norm everybody follows without any problem. Talk about the one that is the most difficult to get people to follow. And then talk about how often you refresh your norms. The issues about norms are ones that if you didn't establish them, I would encourage you to do so. Most groups don't have an intuitive sense about what it is you're trying to accomplish and how you're trying to get the work done. And it just really helps to have them in place. So, like we said in the last slide, you need to focus on behaviors. You need to think about how is it you are going to enforce them without being a police officer. This is not about saying, you didn't begin this meeting and end it on time, you idiot. I don't know what's the matter with you. You have no respect for my time. That's probably not the approach to take. It's one of the things that sometimes people get emotional in meetings. My board has to rein me in sometimes because I get emotional, especially when something's talked about that I have real strong feelings about. But the higher the trust, the easier it is to do those kinds of things. We also just passed out a norm setting protocol, and this is a protocol that comes from the Dufour's book, Learning by Doing, which, if you don't have that, it's a great Bible for PLC work. But it takes you through a specific process on the front page about how to have the conversation. On the back page, or on the back side of that page, you can take a look at, there's kind of a table that shows you a variety of things to consider. Now, I saw at many of the table groups another very similar table to this that you may have used last year. But the idea is that what you want to do is you want to have an opportunity to have people talk about norms, talk about what they're willing to commit to one another as professionals that they're going to follow through with, so that it makes your time together more productive. So we gave you the norm setting protocol. So a couple of things to keep in mind when you're facilitating teamwork. Don't hesitate to reiterate the purpose of the meeting over and over and over again so that people understand this meeting is for this purpose. This is what we're trying to accomplish in terms of mathematical practices. This is what we're trying to accomplish in terms of looking at student work. This is what we're trying to accomplish in terms of assessments. Because if you are real clear about your purpose, it's really going to help in terms of having your teachers focus on what the purpose is, not what the unpurpose is. This unpurpose thing is a really handy thing to have. If you have a group that wanders off topic all the time, state the unpurpose of the meeting. So the unpurpose of the meeting is to confess the sins of the Go Math program. We're not going to do that. That's not the purpose. And if you state that up front, you can sometimes cut things off at the pass. This is a trick that I learned from a staff developer down in Atlanta, Georgia. And down there, it's an entire county school district. So it's like, I don't know, somewhere around 85, 90,000 kids. And she would do this on a regular basis, state the unpurpose. But you got to be really clear about what the purpose is. And you got to hold people accountable. That's something that is not something we're not going to be talking about this time. We need to focus on these. So you're going to be talking about planning lessons. You're going to be talking about reflecting on the lessons you just taught, or you're going to be talking about examining student work or assessment results. Okay, those are the big three. So the next thing, as bad as a day might be, if you walk in there with a big smile on your face talking about how enthusiastic you are for this opportunity to work together to deepen our knowledge of the Common Core standards in mathematics, it's going to help everybody kind of, sort of shake off that end of the day kind of scab that a lot of them have. Or the people that think, do I have to be at another one of these meetings again? Your enthusiasm a lot of times is going to help with that. And then when it comes to establishing trust, you establish trust a couple of ways. One of the ways you establish trust is by making sure that you follow the norms and that you hold people accountable for following the norms. It's real similar to what happens in a classroom. That if you don't follow certain rules, what happens to some of the kids in the classroom? It's okay for them to behave this way, but I can't behave this way. And it starts to have this kind of corrosive effect. And then it takes time to rebuild those expectations. It's the same thing that you have in a group. You have to be gentle about this. I had one of my board members go off, turned all red in the face. This is last Wednesday night, which is why we're having a special meeting tonight. Well, it happens, Robin. They are human and so am I. So what happened was he says, this whole season's a disaster. It's going to fall apart. I can't believe this. His face is all red. Former football coach. So what I said was, this is not something that's on the agenda tonight, and we've got 5 minutes left. I wish you had brought this up in advance so we could do something about it. If we don't talk about it right now, the whole thing's going to blow up. We can't put this off. And I said, well, we're going to have to, because we have 2 other items we need to talk about. And so I had to take him aside afterwards, and I said, why did you bring this up at 6:45? Was this something you just learned about today? Well, no, I've been concerned about it for a week now. Thanks, Ed. I said a week now is 6 days too long. I didn't say it quite that sarcastically. I said, if you had said something about this 2 days ago, we could have started to research this. Well, I wanted to wait to the board meeting and make it a formal issue. And I said, that's not helping, is it? And he kind of went, no. 2 days later, I had to call him up and I said, we can't run meetings like this. We can't run meetings by crisis. I said, I depend on you with your experience and with your knowledge of this organization, the time that you were sitting in the president's chair, to have you be more proactive in your approach. We can solve a lot of problems if we know about them when they're small and if we know about them in advance. But if we wait for a monthly board meeting to talk about things, we're going to have a wildfire going. We can't do that. And he says, yeah, I know you're right. I kind of got upset. He says, but at least we got it done. And I said, at too high a price. That can't happen again. We have got to solve these problems as they come up. We can't wait for them to turn into a crisis. And so we have a fairly high level of trust, I think. It depends on what kind of shape my tires are in tonight after the meeting, but I think it's a fairly high degree of trust, and I could have that conversation with him. There's other people I couldn't have that conversation with because there's this doubt about whose agenda we're working on and things like that. So establishing trust is huge, and if you don't think that's true, think about a decision you have to make or a process you have to go through with somebody you trust, and think about how quickly you can get that done. Okay? Now think about that exact same process, that exact same procedure with somebody you don't trust. So building trust is a really important part of what you do, and they will start to look for you for leadership, even though you're going to hear most of the issues that they've got or their reluctance to be there. But your ability to be patient, to direct their work is going to have dividends down the road. Because what it looks like in September and what it's going to look like in March are going to be two different PLCs. So you have to really focus your efforts on guiding those people, not pulling them by the neck, but guiding them. So again, you're wanting to make sure that there's a strong focus on student learning, on student work samples. What is it we want kids to learn? What is that going to look like? And to bring those results back to those meetings so that you have an opportunity to talk over those results. My wife had this experience yesterday where she was doing a district grade level meeting and was asking the teachers what assessments they were going to use. And this one teacher says, fluency. And she goes, great, what are you going to measure? Fluency. And she goes, well, what aspects of fluency? And she goes, fluency. And so it's like, okay, we got to talk about, so what are you going to look at? Miscue analysis, you're going to look at words correct per minute. What is it you're going to be taking a look at? You just can't say fluency. So you have to make sure that there's a specific idea about what data you're going to collect, what you're going to be looking for, and then that next bullet is what can we learn from those results? Did our application of a specific pedagogical principle or a specific strategy lead to a higher degree of student learning? Did we have a faithful implementation of that strategy? Did it result in a type of student learning that we were looking for or not? And that's part of the conversation that has to happen at the PLC. The next thing is about being accountable to the group. The group, if there's a group decision made, everybody's got to come back with that work, with those assessment results. They have to do that, and if they don't, they have to be held accountable. Now again, you don't hold them accountable by hitting them over the head with something. You hold them accountable by saying, those are the results that we all agreed that we were going to bring. Do you have them back in your room? Then if you do, run down your room, pick them up, and bring them back to the meeting. But they don't have the option to say, no, I'm not going to participate, especially if the whole group has made that decision. A couple of the hints that I always use is I always ask my groups to hold me accountable during a meeting. I can be a world record establishing bird walker. If somebody gives me a chance, ask Fran about my bird walking ability. But if you have the group help you out, making sure that you stay on task, that would really help. So it's like I asked you at the beginning of today's meeting, if I forget to repeat a question, then remind me to do that. It helps me stay accountable as well. It's interesting that not stating the purpose of a meeting is the #1 derailer of the meeting. So if they're not clear on why they're, especially for adults, if adults aren't clear on why they're there, the whole thing can spin into the ditch and overturn. So make sure that they understand what the purpose of the meeting is. Redundant communication. My wife calls it nagging. I call it redundant communication, and so does Harvard Business School. There is a really cool article from Harvard Business School. There's a blog that they have called Working Knowledge. And a couple of years ago, they published this article about redundant communication, that just saying something to somebody one time doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get it. So these executives practiced sending out an email, sending out a text message, seeing somebody in the hall, just giving reminders about what they were supposed to follow through with. So redundant communication works. People will go, oh, I forgot. I had to send out a reminder for my board meeting tonight, and I got 6 people sending, oh, thanks for the reminder. Always makes me feel so good knowing they've read the first email. Anyway, and then the last thing is to practice wait time. Don't hesitate to literally count to 3 or count to 5 or count to 7 to give people an opportunity to think. It's the same concept that you use with your students in class. People need some processing time. So one of the other things that you have to do is you have to pay attention to yourself. And what you have to do is you look at these issues here. That sometimes the highest performing PLCs have a sixth sense about how they interact with each other. And they have a sixth sense about where everybody around the table is at in terms of emotion, in terms of their cognitive issues. That's a really important thing. Do you start to feel like something is going on underneath the surface that you need to address? Pay attention to your gut. Pay attention to that little cricky feeling you get in the back of your neck, because that's telling you something. Never ignore that. If you feel like something's cooking, say, hey, I just want to stop here for a second. Is there anything that we need to talk about? Was there something that we said that is either upset somebody or somebody wants to question? Use that sixth sense to pull things out, because occasionally you will find something that will stop the functioning of the group, because now they start thinking about that issue. They don't think about all the other things that are going on. The other thing is making sure that all points of your PLC are drawn into the conversation. I don't know how large your PLCs are, and if they're 3 or 4 people, it's pretty easy to do that. But if you have a larger one, or if you have somebody that tends to be kind of a wallflower, intentionally draw them in. Say, Judy, I haven't heard from you yet this afternoon. What's your thinking on this particular issue? Or what's your thinking on the use of this particular strategy? Oh, I think it's fine. Okay, well, that may be the first response you get, but constantly make sure that that person that tends to stay out of the conversation is drawn back into the conversation. And my favorite thing is body language. I told you about red faces. You can sometimes see red faces, people talking to themselves, other indicators that something is going on. So we also have a blue sheet that we're about to hand out to you. One of the things that Peter Senge talks about in his learning communities is having the opportunity to balance advocacy questions with inquiry questions. Now, advocacy questions are people like me. I get up in front of a group of people and I tell you what to think, I tell you what to do, I tell you how you should operate, and I don't give you too many opportunities to ask questions. But in a PLC, what you want to try to do is balance the advocacy positions with questions. So this handout that's coming out to you, the idea in an advocacy role is to explain what you think or feel about a particular issue. And think about this, if everybody in the PLC is talking about their own personal point of view and nobody asks any questions to see what's the underlying logic, why do you think that's the best course of action, why do you think that won't work, what'll happen is that you're left with a series of statements around the table and you're going, okay, I guess we better move on. So you want to balance the advocacy and inquiry. So what we're going to do is pass this chart out, and at your table group, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take one of the issues that you're dealing with currently in mathematics, all right? And what you're going to do is start with the advocacy positions, and you can subdivide your big table so you don't have 6 people, you can go groups of 3. But to talk about, start with the advocacy position, and then have one of the people in your subgroup start to ask some of the inquiry questions and see how well that goes. Now this is an academic exercise because you're not in your regular PLC, but it'll give you a feel for how to try to balance those two off. So we're going to give you about 5 or 6 minutes to do that. I'll come around and check at the tables. If you have any questions or any issues, I'll try to give you the definitive answer. Or one of the reasons that I do formative assessments in a classroom is to find out how lousy my explanations are. So I just found out how poor I taught this because I've had to spend time at each one of the tables. Let me see if I can distill this down to something that will be reasonably helpful to all of you. The point with advocacy and inquiry is that you want to have a balance in your PLCs so that if all you hear are one advocacy question or advocacy statement after another one, for example, I think that this method, the box method, is the best way to teach kids this, this algorithm. And I say, oh, well, I think using the standard method is the best way to teach this algorithm. What do you have? You need to say, so help me understand what your thinking is. Now, one of the tables said, we don't talk like this. And I said, good. What you want to do is talk like you talk, but how do you ask a question? How do you make a statement of belief or whatever that is? So you don't want to have somebody saying, I am advocating for this position, because a couple of people actually said, well, okay, I would say, and they tried to finish the stem with that. This is a principle, it's a concept, so that if you have a PLC that asks too many questions, or if you have a PLC that advocates too many positions, you want to try to balance that. That's what I was trying to say. Is that a little bit clearer the second time out? Okay, so any questions about this now? Okay, so you want to go back to your table group and finish a couple more minutes of talking through this, about floating a couple of scenarios and trying to practice your way through this? 2 more minutes, go. One of the questions I have for you is, I understand that the way that your PLC structures work is that you have one mandatory meeting every month and one voluntary one. Is that correct? All right, let me ask you a question. How do you get higher attendance at the voluntary PLC meeting? Okay, wait, one at a time. Who would like to start?
Snacks.
Snacks, okay? If you feed them, they will come to the meetings, right? Any other techniques for encouraging voluntary participation?
They get hours. Salary credit.
All right, so now we have 2. Anybody else have a motivational tool that encourages participation?
Do some kind of a make and take activity where when they leave, they have something that they can use in the classroom the next day.
Okay, we have another one.
Kind of like reading a good novel. If you're really into it, you don't want to put it down. We've had some conversations that were really going well, and when we were done, it was like, well, what are we going to do next? And so they actually want to come back for the next part.
Does anybody else have any helpful hints about how to encourage? Okay.
Have your grade level team come up with the topic.
Oh, yes, giving them a little input into things.
We also added on to our mandatory. Sometimes we'll just have the mandatory and then continue it for the next hour as optional.
We've met at restaurants.
You see, you notice when it's a good idea, you go,
Mark,
Okay.
could we have that one repeated? Mark,
Gotta love those ones.
could they
yes.
repeat? Could she repeat what was said over there?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Could they repeat what that was said? Repeat what they said. No, was there anything said over there? They just couldn't hear it.
You have to repeat yourself. I'm sorry, you'll have to repeat yourself.
Oh, we've met at restaurants because we find sometimes that the beverage of choice is helpful to relax.
You and I could have quite a conversation right now, couldn't we? Anyway, so so you have several opportunities or several ideas about how to encourage that voluntary participation. Did that help a little bit? Maybe 1 or 2? Okay. That's part of the function of a professional learning community, is that you are all part of this professional learning community trying to improve your skills about getting teachers to talk about making fundamental changes in the way that they operate in their classrooms. And so if you can figure, if a little chocolate can go a long way, Sometimes, depending on where you go for the conversation, that can loosen people's lips as well. So there's a number of different choices you have for how you might do that. Of course, it's kind of interesting. Most of your tables talk about how high functioning your PLCs are. So that means waking up at 3 o'clock this morning, perseverating over this presentation was a total waste of time. I could have consumed way, well anyway, that's another issue. All right, so we've already pretty much talked about bullets 2 and 3, but I think it's often important to remind people that any major change is going to result in a certain amount of conflict. The nonprofit that I'm with, if I can do this without crying, I'll be fine. We lost our artistic director on May 19th after our annual banquet on May 18th, okay? She said, I've taken a job with another group, love you guys, but see you later. Okay, fine. So the person we brought on board was appointed on June, I think it was June 4th, and that artistic director at the ripe old age of 34 died on June 7th. In the meantime, our office supervisor resigned because her family was moving to San Diego, so we had to hire another office supervisor. Totally new to the culture, all that kind of stuff. The new artistic director that we hired didn't come on board until August. Does that kind of give you a little context to the red-faced board member that was like tearing his hair out? We had so much change, and we had so many conflicts because of that. Everybody's in kind of a state of shock. So that change is going to equal conflict. Just remember that conflict is a negative emotion. It's very close to another real strong emotion, which is attachment or love, so that they're not separated by a whole lot. So if you acknowledge to people, we are going through a significant change, this is going to cause some conflict, but unless we talk about it, nothing's going to change. It's going to continue to fester. So encourage people to talk through this, and we'll give you some talking points about that. I saw on a number of your sheets, presume positive intent. And so that's always a thing to say, why would this normally rational person fly out of their seat and try to wring my neck? There's got to be something else going on in their life. I always like to have a fallback position. The grant language, which is going to be evaluated by an outside evaluator, has all this information about PLCs, about student learning, about a deep implementation of the Common Core State Standards. If anybody needs a purpose, go back to the purpose of the grant, because that's what the grant people are going to be looking at. Maintain a parking lot. But my sister-in-law, who's also a teacher, when we were talking at one point about how we do meetings, and she said, oh, you use a parking lot too? You use a parking lot? That means you put all the stuff down that we want to talk about and then you ignore it. And I went, well, that's not what I do in my parking lot. I usually forget where I parked it, but it's really important to come back to the parking lot, because people will get a sense that you're blowing them off if you use a parking lot and never return to it. So one of the hints is, okay, this is something you can use my STEM. I can tell you feel extremely strong about this topic. Okay, you can say, okay, I get it. This is important. We'll put it on the parking lot. We'll come back to it just before the end of the meeting. As a facilitator, set your timer. Ask one of your partners to remind you when there's 5 minutes left, so you can go back and you can say, okay, this issue came up. Who's going to handle it? And when do we report back? How are we going to report back? Are we going to do this at the next meeting? Are we going to do this with an email to our group? Are we going to put notes in people's boxes? What are we going to do to get back to this issue? Because that's the quickest way to alienate a group of people. See my issue up on a parking lot and then it disappears. So that's what I would recommend that you do if you use it. But make sure you put a name on it so you don't get this, I gotta tell you what happened this morning. So you don't get this kind of anonymous corrosive comment that's out there. So I'm at my RSDSS consortium meeting. I know that's a tongue twister. So we had people from all 11 regions at this meeting downtown Sacramento today. And we do a hot topics too, which is not really a parking lot. But every time somebody's issue went up, I put their name by it. And after the third one, which was, tell us what you know about this new state superintendent challenging Torlakson, the person said, why did you put my name up there? And I said, well, I put your name up there so we could remember who said it. And they went, well, I don't know that I want my name with that particular issue. Oh, my mistake. You want me to take that off the list? Well, no, I just kind of not comfortable because there's all these CDE people in the back of the room too, and they're furiously taking notes while people are putting their hot topics up. But so at the break time, I said, so tell me what you're feeling about this. Would you rather make this a happy hour conversation at 4:30, or do you want to have this in front of the entire group? And he said, you know, I think it might be a good idea to take that off the hot topics and put it on for happy hour. And so sometimes by putting a name up there, you can actually have somebody decide maybe there's a better time and place to do that. Most of your teachers have a parking lot summit anyway after the PLC meetings where the real work gets done. So what you have to do is, if you can cut them off at the pass, that'll help. Let's talk about conflict. Conflict has to be addressed. It will turn into 18 molar acid that will burn holes in the trust and the fabric of your, I'm sorry, I'm using a high school term. Anybody here a chemistry person? Do you understand what I just said? It's like really strong acid. Okay, it'll eat holes in you and your people if it's not addressed. So one of the ways that you do it is draw it out. Say, I know you guys are upset about this, let's talk about it. Let's sunshine this issue. And then you have an opportunity to actually talk about what it is that's making people angry. Anger is usually a secondary emotion. It's not an initial emotion. Anybody that watched a Giants-Dodgers game understands that anger is a secondary emotion. All right? But the idea is that you have to then try to draw out and acknowledge the different perspectives. Even though you may not agree with somebody's issue, draw it out. Let them be able to articulate why it is they feel that way. And if it's conflict, it's a real substantial conflict. See if you can identify any common ground. For those of you that may be familiar with Stephen Covey's work, that's where you get to win-win. And he says it's win-win or no deal. If we have time, I'll tell you my Covey story too. But the idea is that conflict, if you ignore it, it doesn't go away. Okay? It just gets worse and worse and worse. And then it comes out in very strange ways. And then you wonder, gosh, what's all that about? And that's because it's a conflict that's been unresolved. So I would encourage you to do that. Any questions about how to do this, how to deal with conflict when it happens in a meeting or one of your PLC meetings? Okay, Jerry, did you give me all the highest functioning PLCs in the district on this first one to warm me up? Anyway.
No, but you know what I think?
Yes.
Is that I know there's issues, and I know there's issues at every school site, and I know that some of you are being reserved in not saying what the issues are. And so at the very beginning, when Mark first started talking about being a place of trust, you know, this is our opportunity to bring to light those issues that we're all dealing with, because there are individuals in the room that have had those issues. They've worked through them and been successful, and they're now on the other side of the obstacle. And the reason we set aside the 2.5 hours today was to be able to have this forum so that we could put on the table some of the things that all of you are struggling with, that you've confided in me about, or that your principals and you have tried to work out with other team members. And so we brought Mark in because when he role plays an issue, he does it so eloquently, and it's just hearing how it's done is why we wanted this to have this to be the opportunity to bring it out. So if you're resisting being open and honest about what you're struggling with as a PLC leader, I'm going to encourage you to take advantage of his expertise, because when we role played and we were practicing and also coming up with the agenda for today, the things he said, because he's trained with the DeFores and he is a practitioner of PLC work, it flows off his tongue as if he just lives, eats, and drinks this. And so this is your opportunity to say, what does it sound like when someone says, well, I don't want to come to the optional meeting because my daycare is this, or whatever the excuse is. How do you approach that? Or if someone shows up repetitively late or they don't come with the student work, when we played this back and forth, Mark has a way of going back to those collective commitments that you made because you have norms that are very behavior centered. That's why we revisited the norms today, because there are some schools that still haven't codified the norms. And so you have resistance and you have people not participating because you haven't set the norms in place, which is what we asked, to do last year. That's why we know this is the winning year. As we had at the kickoff, this is our opportunity to have a restart. We have new PLC leaders. We have now a year under your belt where we want this to be a kickstart to be able to focus on those 4 big questions, focus on those 3 big ideas, and really work collaboratively as a community of learners in this room to problem solve together. And so this is the opportunity. So those of you that are just not wanting to say anything out loud, take a risk. Because no one's judging you as being ineffective or judging your school site because you're not up and running. This is our opportunity. This is our training ground.
So, because what's said in the ballroom goes on tape, I just thought that maybe that's why people are kind of reluctant to say anything. So why don't we try this? It's a lot harder to hear what's going on at the table. So why don't, if you have an issue or a question that you'd like to generate on a piece of paper, then I'll go ahead and I'll try to answer them. Going around to most of your tables, it sounds like most of you have some minor glitches that you tend to work through with your people. I don't want to, I have a real belief you don't fix what ain't broke. So if you got a high-performing PLC, that's great, but if there's any issues or any questions you want to have anonymously brought up, then we'll do that. How do you encourage meaningful dialogue during PLC meetings with teachers who have traditionally, historically, and genetically been very reluctant to converse? So another one of my inspirational people is Michael Fullen, and he talks about small victories. And a number of small victories add up to large victories. And it's part of your job is to not try to psychoanalyze these people, but to help that individual be able to sunshine what they're thinking about this particular issue. So as the facilitator, you can even call it out. You guys, I know you're hostages right now at this required PLC meeting, but it ain't the cruise you signed up for, but it's the one you're on. So let's find a sunny part of the deck, and let's go find it. So it's like one of your groups put down, use humor to help encourage people to talk. Now, I know that there are some individuals that are like barnacles, that they are two-dimensional, they have no emotion, they will just roll their eyes. And what I think you have to try to do is you have to try to bring them into the conversation as best you possibly can by just saying, so what you're thinking about this, you've been doing this for a long time. Acknowledge the fact that they may be part of the landed gentry. I mean, they were among the first teachers that opened this school back in, well, can you think of a better term? I mean, it's, wait a minute, I'm close to retirement. Thanks a lot. So, no, these are people who have been around for a while. Keep in mind that one of the bad things about being around for a while is that this sure looks like a pendulum swing to me, because I remember Mathland back in 92 and 93. Oh, I get some nodded head. I got some stories about Mathland. Anyway, but what happens is that most teachers, you guys can turn off the camera for this quote. Most teachers did not wake up this morning and look in the mirror and say, you know what? I think I'm going to do a half-assed job today. Most people, most teachers have lost their idealism because they've been thwarted, they've had too many changes dropped on their heads, they've had they've had their idealism pulled out because of some issues that have happened with some curricular change or some administration change or something like that. And some of them are just saying, if it's okay with you, I'm going to let this pendulum just swing right back and forth. I was here before you got here, and I'll be here after you leave, so let the pendulum swing. I think sometimes you have to acknowledge the fact this may look like another pendulum swing, and I know only time's going to tell. But as long as we have this time together, your perspective is valuable because you've been here before. So we'd really like to hear what you have to say about this topic. And you may get, okay? The good news is you won't see him again for another month, okay? And so the bad news is that it's really important because other people are watching this going on and they may not say anything, but you've got to work your magic to try to draw them out of the conversation. And sometimes acknowledging the fact that this is a pendulum swing or looks like a pendulum swing can at least get that, they'll cough that hairball up, and then you can start having them talk about it because they were burned the last time that this happened. And that's an important part to try to acknowledge, especially with people like me, okay, that we still write notes. We can't really figure out what our iPhone is supposed to do, much less is capable of doing. And, you know, hybrid cars? No, I want a carbureted engine. Some of us are stuck in the 60s or the early 70s. And for a lot of people, this is a new generation. You don't talk about your teaching. You go into your room and you do the best job you can with the kids that you have and get them as far as you can go. When I started teaching, that was the rule. We were all in independent practice. 55 practitioners at that school, all doing their own thing. Things have changed. We understand a lot about the research is that people work, you can work more productively together. But people have to see that actually happening. So one of the slides later on is that you've got to have people change their practices first. That means that old irascible barnacle has to bring student work samples. They have to bring all the wisdom that they've accrued over the last 38, 39, 40, 41 years of teaching and bring it to those meetings and talk about what that looks like, because chances are they've got some insight about something. And it's just a matter of continuing to encourage that conversation. I had my share of barnacles, okay? And it's one of those things where I always tried to use humor first, because I figured if I can get somebody laughing, then maybe they're willing to hear that, because there's all kinds of neurobiological reasons why laughter helps encourage people to kind of relax. So, but if I couldn't get them through laughter, then I would try to appeal to their ethical or moral sense, okay? I would never try to play that trump card because I said so. But as a principal, as a PLC leader, that's not a trump card you want to say. You want it about as far as you can go is the grant requires that we do this, and as long as we have to spend this time together, we should really have a productive conversation about the thing that I know you care the most about, and that's students. So nobody can say, oh, I don't care about kids. I want to see them all pushed off the edge of the deck. No, they're not going to say that. So they're going to be.
So Mark,
I can't really respond.
Can we
Yes.
look at going through some of the
Sure.
more questions so that?
I told you I can go off track. See, Jerry's very helpful. Okay, so the next one. So with that irascible person, the thing to try to do is use humor, try to encourage them to have the conversation. So what to do, let's see. What to do about teachers who participate in meetings and agree to everything, but then go back to their room and teach the same old. I think you start with, we made an agreement that we were going to use this particular strategy or this particular technique in the classroom. So when we make that agreement to each other, then we need to bring back samples that demonstrate that we actually did that. And I think you just be really upfront with people. And you say, so the commitment we're making to each other as professionals is that we're going to go back and do this. And we're going to do this strategy and we're going to implement it. So you just remind them that this is a commitment they made. You said they agreed. I think the note says here, they participate and agree to everything. Then they have to be held assertively but humanely accountable. And that is, we all made this decision together. We all decided to do this. we need to follow through on this. We need to follow through on our commitments. Look at the pronoun use. We need to follow on our commitments. Not you, Janet, need to follow on your commitments. So Janet goes, what? You know, and it's like you don't want to call somebody out. You want to try to talk about, if this is a collective inquiry, use collective nouns or pronouns. Next one. How do you deal with a seasoned teacher who is a know-it-all and dominates the meetings? You tell them that the meeting is Thursday at 3 o'clock. You meet on Tuesday. So what you have to do with a situation like that, that's what I did. No, so what happens is you have to say, our norms talk about making sure that we talk 1/n of the time. So I'm going to ask you, Herman, that you are dominating the conversation right now. And we really do need to hear other people's points of view. And before you give Herman a chance to say anything, say, so Mildred, what's your point of view about this particular issue? That's where you can do one of those. If you're looking for stems, you can use one of the advocacy or inquiry things, or you just use you and just say, okay, Herman, we know what you think about this. I need to find out how other people feel about it. What about you, Mildred? What about you, Ellen? What about you, Tom? And you go around to other people. If they interrupt and you don't have a norm that says we will listen to one another, then you have to say, now remember the norms about listening to one another and not interrupting. And that's the easiest way to get somebody to dominate. I have a board member like that. She's almost as bad as me. She loves to hear herself talk. And I have to remind her, I have to say, Mildred, and because we're musicians, I get to say, take the coda, which means it's take the ending, we're done. And I'll go like this, and I'll say, okay, and she'll like this. She's an alto. But anyway, so, oh, I got some singers in the group. Okay, well, now you understand. Okay, so what happens at sopranos on a board meeting? Oh, my God. Anyway, but the idea is that what you basically have to tell them is that one of our norms is we don't dominate. We share the floor, and we get all of our perspectives talked about. All right. So how do we professionally deal with folks who do not do the homework or bring student work for the meeting? So again, it goes back to that collective commitment. We've made a commitment that we're going to bring these student work samples. Do you have them back in your room, Tom? Then you need to go get them, because that's what we said we were going to be talking about. And if Tom says, I don't have them, then you say, that was one of the commitments that we made. When we make the commitments this time in this meeting, we expect everybody to follow through with that. That's our responsibility as peers to one another. And if you think about, yes?
That's making me think of that redundant communication. It's making me think of what you said about redundant communication, and I find, 2 days before the meeting, send them an email to remind them, if you haven't done this already, make sure you get it done and bring it to the meeting.
You're brilliant, Vanessa. That's another way. Now, if people forget out of the goodness of their heart, that's one thing. If they're being oppositional, then what you have to do is talk about what these commitments are. Principles, you're the one that is the cop with the radar gun. So that means you're the one that has the conversation that says, this is not okay. And this, whether you agree or not, you need to follow through with the commitments you're making. I'm going to come to your PLC meeting, and I'm going to become your best friend. I'm going to do everything I can to support you so that you can support the work of your grade level team to make sure that this work gets done. We may not agree on whether these mathematical practices are right or wrong, but that's not the point. The point is you made a commitment, you have to follow through with it. Learning by Doing's got a great chapter in it that addresses what the role of the principal or the administrator is, okay, and how to have that conversation. And there's a whole series of steps. If you want me to print that off, I'll send it to you, Jerry. And any principals that need that, fine. As a PLC leader, as a teacher, you can't be the cop. That's the job of the administrator. The administrator's got to sanction. The PLC leader has to encourage, cajole, counsel, laugh, all those other kinds of things. Okay? So the next one. It's the Nevada approach. How do you approach kinder teachers that are used to leaving, at contract time and don't bring topics up to be discussed at the optional meetings? Okay, so teachers that are used to leaving at contract time. So I don't know your contract. So one of the quickest ways to undo this entire process is to violate contract language, okay? Because then somebody has something, they have a part of the contract that they can grieve. So I'm gonna have to kick this upstairs to HR, but my original answer would be this. Well, if they're used to leaving at contract time, then it's see you later. If they don't bring up topics to be discussed at the optional meeting, then they're going to have to abide by whatever's decided at the optional meeting. Okay? If the optional meeting is going to actually take action that everybody's going to agree to, then they have to agree to that. But we may use Vanessa's redundant communication model. We may say, Donna and Marie, would you know, we're going to have that optional meeting next week. Was there anything that you wanted to have brought up at that time to kind of remind them of things? Remember, kindergarten teachers spend most of their time herding cats, okay? And, you know, it's one of the reasons why I didn't spend a lot of time in a kindergarten classroom. I got another story about trying to teach kindergartners. It was just a disaster. You understand why I was at home in 7th and 8th grade. But so I think you ask them again. Remember, we have an optional meeting. Do you have any topics you want to have brought up? And at contract time, if the contract says they only have to stay until 2:15 and they stand up and walk out at 2:15, then they can stand up and walk out at 2:15. I don't know that there's any way to supersede that, but I think that's a question maybe Jerry and Kara can find out from HR about.
They know every teacher is to be at one mandatory meeting per month, and then one of them is optional per month.
Okay.
And so schools have been creative in being able to tack on minutes on the after contract time so that they're only meeting once for a longer period, those that choose to be there, and it's optional after time. There's multiple ways to be creative to build the desire to want to be there. And so that's why we want to have this opportunity to have a forum where people can share what they're doing to make it so people want to be there.
I've said that the best lesson about change in public education comes from the Wizard of Oz, okay? Every PLC's got somebody with the brains, the heart, and the courage to get things done. You just need those cool ruby shoes. So what I think you want to think about in your group is that, remember, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion didn't have any of that. They had it all along, but they never knew it. So you may have the same thing in your PLC. So has anybody successfully dealt with the Nevada issue, where you have a situation where you've been able to encourage people to stay after contract time? Does anybody have a solution for that? She's going to the restaurant with the kindergarten teachers.
One thing, what I've tried to do is find out what they do have, that heart and all, and I'll just say things like, you know what, I really appreciate that you are able to work on the technology part of our team because I'm weak at that. Thank you so much because you move our team forward. And another one is real creative with their artistic work. And I say, you know what, thank you for looking at that newsletter last time because, boy, mine, it was really dead, and I appreciate that you brought it to life. So I try to tap into something they're really good at and constantly let them know, you know what, we need your skill at the meeting. If you could please come, and then doing that personal contact with them. Because face-to-face, it's hard for people to look at you and say, you know what, get on that ship and get off the sunny side. You know, they're really, it's not that easy to turn you down face-to-face.
That's true. Anybody else have a way to encourage people that has been successful?
When I had to lead it last year, I led it with 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, so I had 3 different levels. So I did all 3 at the same time, and I actually did mine back to back, so we did a 2-hour meeting. It made them actually less inclined to get up and leave after the first hour. But what I also did is I spent the first hour teaching them what I had learned at our meetings, and then I actually gave them the second hour. We stayed in the same room together.
So we actually spent a lot of time cross-articulating, and they really, really liked that, because we were able to look in each other's books and talk about what did you do, what are they learning in other grade levels. And I think they actually found that more powerful than being by themselves. And when we, at the very end, when we talked about how did this work for you, they said that was the thing they spoke about was being the most powerful, was actually being in rooms with other grade levels to talk about what's going on, especially with it being new standards, new curriculum. Everyone felt like they were back at year one learning. So they felt like that was super powerful, even though it was a second hour of the day. And the teachers who weren't there actually felt like they were missing out because they didn't know what had happened.
Any other ideas about encouraging the reluctant teacher? It may be something that if you still have that, when you meet again as a cohort, it would be good to talk about, did any of the ideas that your peers shared work? And if they didn't work, keep searching until you find that aspect of professional, ethical, or moral fiber that you can encourage somebody to do. Leaving early, arriving late. This sounds like a norm violation to me. And so I think you have to encourage people to say, the meeting starts at 2:10 and we're going to be done at 3:05. And so that's the time frame. Well, I see what happened is that I got Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Wilson, and that other kid's mother, the one that's the crackhead, we're all at my door. And you say, if that happens once, I understand. If that happens every month, that's something you need to take care of. You need to let your parents know you've got a place to go and you've got things to do. And same thing about leaving early. Now, if there's an emergency, I totally understand that. But if there isn't an emergency, then it's like you're committed to be here until this time. And that's part of our norms. Those are the commitments we've made to each other so we can get this work done. Remember, the thing that we're working towards doing here is getting a very high degree of understanding and competence in the Common Core math. That's why we're here. And to reiterate those messages. Anybody else have a good one about arriving late and leaving early?
Just kind of a helpful point of view that I keep in mind is, there's incidents and then there's patterns. And when something is an incident, it really isn't helpful to come down on somebody like a ton of bricks. It's actually, people get really offended, like, wow, this is the only time I've ever been late. What's the problem? But if there's a pattern, then that gives you the evidence to be able to have a conversation. Like, I've noticed that, there's been 3 or 4 times you've been late. So what's going on? So drawing that distinction helps me.
Any other helpful hints? Okay, let's move on. What's the next one, Jerry?
I'm doing Common Core. I'm doing Common Core in my own room, don't need PLC.
I'm doing Common Core in my own room, but I don't do PLC. Well, I understand that you are doing the Common Core work, but one of the requirements of this grant, one of the reasons you're getting an additional stipend is so that you participate in the PLCs. And so, great. If you're doing the Common Core in your classroom, then you must have tons of techniques and tons of student work samples to share with us. We really need to have you there. So the meeting's going to start at 2:10. We'll end at 3:05. You need to be there with those work samples. I really appreciate you honoring the commitment that we've made to each other. What's the next one?
Tell me when there is a video blank so I can go home, because videos are a waste of time.
Is Fran someplace close by? Because she's in a lot of those videos. Oh, hi, Fran. Wow, that's an interesting. What was that again?
Tell me when there is a video so I can go home, because videos are a waste of time.
So I think what I would say to somebody like that is, I think I'd put on my inquiry hat. So what was it about this particular video that you found such a monumental waste of time? or to say, help me understand what it was about the video that didn't seem to help your understanding about Common Core math. It would be good for us to know that if we got some videos that are real clunkers here, we should get rid of them. So I think you co-opt them into something like that. Anybody else have a comment that they would make? Yes?
I think I would raise the point that it's really not about watching the video. You could watch the video at home, but it's about having the conversation about what you saw and learned and your reflection on the video. That's where the power of it lies. And so if you watch it at home, you're missing the opportunity to reflect with others on what you've witnessed.
Anybody else have some helpful hints for that one? Yeah, Fran? You have to know that I call her Frantastic.
Stop it, Mark. Stop it. One of the things that in all of these comments that we're hearing, a lot of them seem a little snarky, for lack of a better term. And so you're entering into my world, our world of professional development. You are, as the PLC leader, in charge of the professional development for that hour, for that grade level. And what happens with us when we hear, sometimes even from you, kind of a comment laced in a snark, right, is you have to think, uh-oh, something is upsetting to that person. There's some sort of fear. Maybe they don't think they can do it. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe they tried it. It didn't even go well. And they certainly don't want to sit around and talk about it. So I think diving deeper into some of those comments is really, really helpful, because they really aren't what they're saying. It's something deeper. So maybe I don't want to look at a video because I can't teach like that. My kids can't. We've heard a lot of that around today. My kids can't. That is a stop statement. And basically what they're saying is, I'm not successful. I don't know how to do this. And we are, and I've said this 100 times, so here's 101, embarking on the single biggest change in mathematics education. But the trick is we're expected to change it even though we weren't trained in the change. We're in it right now. So our growing up math education, unless you had some really insightful teachers who did it differently, you were taught the same way we all were, sort of I do, you do, we do, like, God, I just lost it. Rick said this morning, the idea that you memorize things, and now we want people to think. And you're leading the charge at your grade level, at your school. So when these things come up, we have to be sort of human detectives and look a little deeper. What's behind it? Especially those things where it's just a stop statement. Does that make sense? Am I making sense there? Because you don't want to just say, oh, forget you. Those are the people that probably need the support of a PLC the most in actuality.
What's our next one?
Well, the next question I'll address.
You do that.
Because it's administrators assume things are happening in PLCs, but they are not. And so one of the things, just so you as PLC leaders know about this year, is that for the first time, we're able to get 6 hours of professional development for the site administrators to be able to really see the overview of the math generation, to be able to provide them with what to look for when they are in the classrooms, centered around student engagement, looking at the standards for mathematical practice, looking at math content. And so, in all fairness, this is the first opportunity this year to really get before the administrators and to map out how they can best support the community of learning at your site, with them having those tools to be able to support your PLCs. And we're giving them, Fran and I will see them next week, strategies to be able, as they're going through classrooms and visiting, is to what do they notice, and then what can they bring back to your PLCs to ponder and to think through and to work with you on. And so I think we'll leave that one, and then hopefully months from now we can revisit this question again to see that you're getting that support and that what you need at your site to be able to carry out this role as a professional developer, because it is a challenge.
The 4 questions of a PLC. What do we want students to learn? How will we know they've learned it? What will we do? How will we respond when students don't learn it? And how will we respond to the students that already know it so that we can extend and we can enrich their learning opportunity. These are the 4 questions you're going to want to use as your bread and butter when you're in conversations. So when we talk about mathematical practices, we're talking about what are the students going to be doing. Those of you that have had any coaching training, the first thing you're told in instructional coaching is, we'll go into a classroom and look at what the kids are doing, not what the teacher's doing. Okay, it's what the kid's product is. And that's really important. And that's one of the things we need to reiterate with our teachers is we want to see what the students are doing. Our job is to guide the students to do something differently. Okay, and then knowing what kinds of assessments you're using, whether they're going to be formative assessments, whether they're going to be some kind of interim assessment that suggests that the student has learned what they need to learn, those are 2 important aspects to make sure that you have as part of that conversation. So what did you use? What formative assessments did you use that led you to believe that the kids really got that concept? Those are the kinds of things you're going to be talking about. And then we have to take a look at these 2 issues. Was there a pedagogical glitch that got in the way of some of the kids' learning? Or was there that one little misunderstanding that they had? Anybody that's taught math has had this experience where you sit down and you go, Tracy, how did you get that answer? And they talk their way through it, and they have one little itty-bitty misunderstanding. And then the rest of the answer's wrong. And so sometimes by taking a look at assessment results, you can unlock pretty quickly where the misunderstanding is. And that's how you respond to some of the problems that kids have. And then the last one is, for that student whose parent wants to send them to Stanford in 4th grade, there is a program that they can enroll in. It's probably not at any of your schools, but what you can do is you can figure out together, how do we develop something that will extend and enrich their learning without letting them accelerate so far ahead of everybody that we're going to have a class within a class. So those are the kinds of things you can talk about in your PLC. The idea here is that you want to move towards action. You have to make a commitment that we are going to implement a set of learning strategies. We're going to implement this particular teaching strategy. We're going to implement this assessment. We're going to implement this particular model. And we're going to commit to take action on it and bring back the results. The only way we're going to learn is by putting this piece into practice. And you have a great opportunity to do that, to reiterate with people using grant language or using your own ethical, moral appeals about, we are trying to create a generation of students that understand mathematics at a foundational level, really get it, not can just be human calculators. So again, we've talked about a lot of these bullet points previously. So this is just a reminder slide. The idea is that that 3rd bullet, what action are we willing to commit to, becomes a really important part of the conversation. What are we willing to commit that we're going to follow through on and bring back? It'll take care of some of the issues we're talking about here. So when we talk about eliminating practices that get in the way, there are some traditional mathematical practices that people have used since, well, forever. We talked about some of those teachers earlier today, the people that have held on to certain strategies and aren't willing to try something new or say this is, they're not doing this. We have to figure out what's getting in the way of student learning on a deep level. And so sometimes people have to let go of a practice, daily oral math, their math facts. There's some things that they've held on to for years. And like Fran said, a lot of times people hold on to these practices out of fear. It's the only thing that they know. And what we're talking about here is way too challenging. And so we have to make it okay for people to have a grand flop at implementing a strategy, falling flat on their face, and be able to stand up, dust themselves off, and laugh about it. Nobody died. Okay, so let's keep this in perspective. What we did is we had a misstep with a pedagogical piece. What did you learn by doing that implementation? Not, oh, you're a gross failure and you're a waste of oxygen in this PLC. We should send you to the middle school. That's not the kind of conversation that you should be having. I know, it's my homeboys, right? Yeah. Anyway, so the idea is that you want to make sure that people understand failure is a way to help us grow, so don't worry about it. Do the very best job you can and bring back to the rest of the group. Develop the trust. Nobody's going to start laughing at another teacher when they say, this didn't work. They're going to say, did you try this way? In fact, they may even be overly helpful, okay? But the idea is that in a PLC, if we're trying to increase trying to increase everybody's awareness and understanding of mathematics pedagogy, the best way to do it is in a network of people that are going to be supportive and understanding and offer counsel about how to make it work better. And then always go back to the purpose. What are we here to do today? Go back to those, are we planning a lesson? Are we reflecting on a lesson? Or are we taking a look at assessment data? So the last bullet, I think, is the most important one, okay? It's what you do, not what you call it. So if people say, oh, if I hear this PLC again, I'm going to just choke. And you say, okay, fine. Then let's call it something else. Let's call it a mathematics skull session, whatever you want to call it. If PLC is 2, then come up with another term. But inside that work, we are going to be inside that time, we're going to be looking at student work, we'll be looking at implementation of mathematics practices. We're going to be doing the hard work of making sure that our practices change so student learning can change. I'm going to ask you guys to help me out with this. Look at that first bullet. Is that something that would be redundant if we had you do that right now? Or would you like to take about 5 minutes to just write down what the purpose of your PLC is in 25 words or less? Well, since silence implies agreement, we will go ahead and do that. See, that's a great facilitation thing. You don't wait the full 7 seconds for wait time to give people actual think. You wait about 2.5 and then you say, okay, silence implies agreement. So on a sheet of paper, what I want you to do is work in your group, okay, and we're going to take 3 minutes. 3 minutes for 25 words. That's 8 words a minute. Okay? Are you ready? Go. So what I want you to think about doing is I want you to really concentrate on these 25 words or less. Who wants to be the first one up? Thank you, Tom. What'd you guys come up with?
To improve student learning through collaboration. And then I added, and to facilitate colleague math instructional fluency by peer sharing.
That's pretty good for 25 words or less, huh? Save that. The first mic is calibrated to Jerry's soft, dulcet tones. The second one's calibrated to my big mouth. Okay, so who's number 2? Oh, you guys back here wanted to volunteer. That's great.
To create a collaborative culture focused on learning for all, not just the students.
Okay, that's even shorter. Let's see. How about down here?
To facilitate the implementation of Common Core Math and develop a higher student participation through critical thinking, open exploring, and questioning mathematical concepts for the goal of understanding and mastery. Okay. Anybody else? See now, if you as a PLC leader if you do that, yeah, anyway, I get my noun-verb agreement right here in a second. This is not an ELA thing, this is a math thing, so I can fiddle around with this. Go ahead.
Like half the words.
Well,
we are in PLC to support each other as we implement Common Core.
Sometimes the most succinct comments are the ones that will resonate deepest with people. If you can simplify this to 25 words or less, it will be something you can say, remember, the reason we're here is boom. And you say that again and again, redundant communication. You put that in your tagline of your emails, you put that in your responses out to people, even put it on your agenda so people see that again and again and again. How about back here?
Develop a professional learning community that focuses on mathematical processes and uses data to drive instruction through collaboration to improve student learning within the school community.
Okay, so she's going to have to stay after today and write 50 times on the whiteboard. No. Okay, so the exercise, anybody else want to sunshine theirs? Okay. Thank you, Jerry.
Help all students learn at the highest level, share knowledge and practices, develop higher level thinking and problem solving, analyze data, and offer peer support.
Wow. That's pretty profound. Look what you came up with in 3 minutes. That's pretty deep. So, as I said to you before, I very much feel like the wizard, okay? I have no answers. You're the ones that have the knowledge, the heart, and the courage to pull this off. This proves it. Nicely done. So, I'm going to take another 5 minutes, and at your table group, I want you to share your most valuable kernel of wisdom about what works for you and your PLC. Okay, we're going to take about 3 minutes to do this. Share your best idea. Are you ready? And save this 25 words or less. You will probably need to use this at some point. You know how the school year goes? There's a time when you go into the valley of the shadow of death. Okay, you may want to hold on to this when you make that little journey. Okay, 3 minutes, go. So here's the first trinity. From Tom Guskey, who wrote the book Evaluating Professional Development, he says that we often start our journey in school improvement by trying to change people's attitudes. You can no more change people's attitudes than you can change a Cowboys fan to a 49ers fan. It's not going to happen, okay? It just, or I could say Dodgers and Giants, but it's too close to my heart right now. But the idea is you have to start by changing practices. And so all these practices that are up here are the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about in a PLC. You have to make sure that your PLC models this change in practice, encourages this change in practice, and what it also does is it keeps people accountable for these changes in practice, because when changes in practice occur, there's a change in achievement. As achievement is tracked, you're going to find out what practices work, what practices don't. And eventually you're led to this place where you change your belief system. Because now you say, it is possible to get students to a higher understanding of mathematics concepts by using these pedagogies. I didn't think that was the case at the beginning of this. I didn't think that my meetings with my peers were going to turn out to be this valuable. But you can't tell them that at the beginning. Okay? And here's my proof. Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers tells you to start with a change in practice. You have to track what you eat. I was unclear on the concept of the afternoon Snickers bar. If I don't track it, I guess I didn't eat it. Well, then you go in for your weekly check. You haven't lost anything this week. In fact, you've gained a little bit. Well, I mean, okay, you mean those Snickers bars really counted? Even if I had them with a glass of water, don't they cancel out? No. So to change your belief system, you have to go through this, you have to go through a change in practice and then watch what happens as a result of that. Then you start to believe that, yeah, this really is up to me. It's not up to the cosmos. So Michael Fullen, who's another one of my heroes. I have often told principals in training, find one of these researchers you really believe in, read everything they say, and I guarantee it, since they're all saying so many similar things now, because we know so much about learning, but you learn by doing. You learn by doing. You don't learn by going to a training and have an insultant like me come blab at you for 2.5 hours. You learn by going out there. It's what you all shared at your tables. You have a collective wisdom in this room that's way greater than I will ever have. Okay, but that's what you do. You learn by doing, and you share that wisdom with each other. And so you look at this shared mission. That one of the great things about a grant is you're given money to encourage people to do the right thing. And by doing that, what you can do is take a look at these issues of working collaborative. You're going to make commitments. We're going to make commitments about how we interact with each other. We're going to make commitments about what assessments we're going to use. We're going to make commitments about what pedagogy we use. We're going to take everything and hold it under our own professional lamp and decide, what do we have evidence to suggest that things are working, and what do we have evidence to suggest we should stop doing these things? That's the power of this work together. Think of yourself like a bunch of doctors working together to figure out how efficacious a new medication regime is or how a new surgical procedure is. Would any of you going in for gallbladder surgery now, if a surgeon said, you know, I've been cutting people open from their groin to their shoulder to take a gallbladder out for the last 40 years, it was good enough for them, it'll be good enough for you. And you got somebody next door doing laparoscopic procedures? We have to think of ourselves as professionals, and part of that professional conversation is to get people to look at how do you maximize effectiveness in the classroom. And so that's what I encourage you to do. That's what this work is all about. This work is about finding the best, not the best way, the most effective way to get kids to learn, and the most effective way to get teachers to change their practices so we can influence student learning.